problem. Thanks a lot, Las Cian Corla. Apologies, first of all, from Deputy Smith, who was originally due to be here and wanted to be able to be here to speak. She's our representative on the Oireachtas Committee on key issues facing the traveller community, but she's currently tied up with the climate change bill. The housing crisis that we are talking about, and the particular crises facing the traveller community right across the country, is one reflection of the gross state and societal racism, discrimination and oppression that they face. It's one aspect of it. It's a gross, horrific aspect of it, but it is clearly part of a wider process of racism and discrimination. And the consequences of that racism and discrimination are, plain for anyone to see in terms of the conditions that people are forced to live in, but also in other respects. So, for example, accommodation is one of the key determinants of health, which contributes to traveller children being 3.6 times more vulnerable to not surviving the first year of life. 50% of travellers not expected to live beyond 40, and it's already been mentioned the rates of homelessness, where in some counties travellers would make up 1% of the population, but make up 50% of those who are homeless. And every single crisis that affects our society as a whole then bears down particularly upon groups which are oppressed and discriminated against, and the traveller community is number one in that list in Ireland. You take the example of COVID. I mean, COVID bore down on the traveller community harder than those in the settled community. They were extremely vulnerable because of the living conditions, which made it impossible to comply with public health guidelines, particularly the need to self-isolate. Add to that the absence of access for many to fresh, clean water. And the money that was allocated to deal with COVID in terms of traveller communities was not spent. And we're going to come back to the story of money being allocated and not being spent again and again and again when it comes to the traveller community in a way that doesn't seem to happen in terms of other things. As of November 2020, only 2.5 million of the funding allocated was actually spent. That's of 19 million euros. No, sorry, of 2.5 million, only about 90,000 euros was drawn down. Now, housing is obviously emerging as the key political focus again, but the danger is that the traveller community will be forgotten at best, or consciously ignored and turned a blind eye to, unfortunately more likely, when many of the issues, and not be dealt with in terms of dealing with what we need to do in terms of the housing crisis, and that all the solutions will only be focused on, and very inadequately focused on, the needs of those in the settled community. We have to call out what exists as being a humanitarian crisis facing very many travellers because of the living conditions. And then, particularly in the context of very many fine and genuinely good words, analysis, etc. of what's happening and taking place in this House, we have to look at why is this taking place. And again, we don't really need more reports. Everybody knows why this is taking place. I mean, again, it is a very blunt and very obvious thing when you allocate a bunch of money to local authorities and only a tiny fraction of that is spent in terms of traveller accommodation. Over 72 million euros was unspent by local authorities between 2008 and 2019. In 2020, only 16 new units of traveller-specific accommodation were built, 7 houses, 9 welfare units, no additional bays. And why is that? I mean, it is a reflection of general state racism, no question. General societal racism, no question. But politicians clearly have a very, very important role to play here. The truth which we have to call out is that there are very many local authority politicians, very many of them members of establishment political parties, who play a race card against travellers and block traveller accommodation. That's the truth. In the government, we have a minister who described spending money on traveller accommodation in a particular area as a waste of valuable resources. That's what needs to be challenged if we're going to actually try to assist and deal with this issue.